As part of their Kaiju double event, Games Workshop released yet another battletome alongside the Keragen Overlords, and that is the second edition of the Disciples of Tzeentch, an awesome book that made some huge waves when it was originally released back in first edition. And I want to start off by directing you to the comments below to find my dedicated playlist for the factions. It's actually one of my favorite armies in the game. I have videos all about Tzeentch, his demons, and the insidious mortals that follow them, infiltrating the cities of Order for their own dubious plots and schemes. As a super brief recap here, Tzeentch is the god of plans, plots, magic, deception, and change. His schemes are many and thoroughly convoluted, right? He makes intricate plans that often seem redundant or contradictory. No one knows the 10,000, D chess game that the god of change is currently playing. His demons are unleashed on the realms with a sole mission: corrupt and change the nature of the realms, often mutating the world around them to match that kind of mind-bending slice of chaos that Tzeentch occupies. Now on the mortal end, we have something like the Karak Acolytes and the Zangors. Zangor being fairly straightforward in that they're Tzeentchian beasts of chaos, right? Warped in a very dedicated way to him as a chaos god. But to me, the best part of the book, lore-wise, were the human disciples, the Karak Acolytes. When the book was first released, the forces of Order were doing really well. They just won the Seasons of War campaign, their fortresses survived, and they were becoming a more established presence within the realms. But this battletome darkened all of that, because Tzeentch was an insidious presence. That's kind of the emphasis in the first book, right? A rot from the inside. It flourished in the aristocracy and the high-minded mortals of these cities. This subversion is what led to the forces of Tzeentch coming onto the stage as a true enemy. It's a fantastic book, and if you love Tzeentch, it has everything you like. It has demons and mortals and plans within plans, incredible art, stellar painting tutorials, and more. But the reason I want to make this video is to talk about what was added in the second edition battletome. And these really are mostly the Change COvens available to Tzeentch. It's funny, it's actually one of the few battletomes that has very little to say about the Necroquake other than Tzeentch loves it, right? Destabilizing magic everywhere, gives it a thumbs up, he likes it, but that's really all it touches on, which is a very interesting thing because it's such a big defining feature of every other faction. But really, they leaned hard into adding these Change COvens, which are basically like storm hosts, where you add a layer of depth and narrative to your army. It locks you into an artifact and a command trait. And so in this video, I wanted to touch on them. There isn't a massive amount of lore for each of them, but I think collectively they demonstrate how different Tzeentch armies can look. Some are more demon-focused, others are more focused on mortals, and their plans often seem contradictory. But all of them, somehow, are still perfect examples of Tzeentch, right, and how he conducts himself in warfare within the mortal realms. And I want to start off talking about Eternal Conflagration. I don't know why conflagration is a hard word for me to say. I made a joke about it on Twitter, and this is probably the least subtle and most straightforward that Tzeentch gets. The Eternal Conflagration isn't clever in how it deals with issues. They burn, they destroy, and annihilate anything in the way of Tzeentch's plans. Led by a Lord of Change known as the Radiant Lord, they solve all of their problems with fire. Incredible amounts of destructive fire. But one thing that keeps this feeling very Tzeentchy is the way that fire works. Think of it like it's like this warping change fire. Right? As flames pour over a target, they don't just cause burn damage, they transmute the victim. Right? Too much mutation can kill a victim just as quickly as any spear, because you have stuff like Duarden metal and armor can be turned into like rotting sacks of flesh, and you have swords turned into like snakes and animals. Skin burns, bodies twist and warp and break. If you could weaponize randomness, this is what it would look like. And it kind of goes without saying, the defining unit of this Change Coven is the Flamer of Tzeentch. It's just the blunt, destructive instrument of Tzeentch's will. Right? It's in constant motion, writhing and warping in nature, firing gouts of this like change fire as it belches upon the enemy. And I like that Tzeentch has this is like the Change Coven that's like his hammer, right? I love all the plots and the schemes, that's really cool. But sometimes you just need to get in there and just mess something up. And between saturating an area in actual fire and then the mutating effects of some of it, meaning the change fire thing, this is the ultimate in-your-face Fist of Tzeentch. And now, completely on the opposite side of that spectrum, is the Hosts Duplicitous, where the Eternal Conflagration trait was being very upfront. Like, the cornerstone of this Change Coven is secrecy and deception. The Lord of Change that leads them is known as the Phantom Lord, and this is who Tzeentch calls when he wants to undermine order. They infiltrate cities, they cause regime changes, they destabilize military defenses from the inside. All the cool spy and subterfuge stuff. And I get the sense, although it's not explicitly said, this is much more of a long game war plan. Right? Getting cultists in at the right levels of power and twisting and turning other people in those positions and at those different levels of leadership. It's really the perfect example of that slow corruption from the inside, that subtle, insidious nature. Something you might read if you want to see how this kind of works in action. The book City of Secrets is actually a great example of it. It's that real, infectious side of Tzeentch, and personally what I found most interesting. Because it's not just infiltration for its own sake. The time spent crumbling these bastions from the inside makes the final strike all the sweeter. Because when the time is right, the trap will spring. Cultists will reveal themselves all across the city, defenses will be sabotaged, demons will pour in through fiery portals, and they'll create a situation, right, where the defenders, like the people who are not part of this cult, cannot respond to chaos, and then fill that space with unbridled evil and chaos. And when the defenses do try and rally, the Hosts Duplicitous units pose another challenge. They are able to project some kind of optical illusion, kind of where their names come from. They appear almost in two places at once, but they're kind of in neither one. The difficulty in defending against them is represented in the rules by not really being able to retreat, which I take to mean that you can't pull away from them because you don't really know where they're coming at you from. And the idea of this weird optical effect, I think, is really interesting and unique, right? Because it's mentioned a lot when discussing Tzeentch towers, how it's just, geometry that doesn't make sense and impossible shapes and colors and you go mad. But we don't really see that a lot talked about when it comes to individual units and how they conduct themselves, right? And so mixing that into a faction based on subterfuge and misdirection, I thought was a really cool touch. Probably my favorite of the Change Covens, certainly the one that I would play, is the Hosts Arcanum. The Hosts Arcanum are masters of magic and spellcasting in a world of demon spellcasters. They achieve this mastery by spending all of their time in Tzeentch's great libraries and repositories of forbidden lore and information, meticulously studying magic, spells, grimoires, and rituals. They actually loathe to go to war, not because they're fearful or they're cowards, they just don't want to leave their library, they don't want to be interrupted in the middle of their study. But of course they follow orders and attempt to make the battle as quick as possible so they can get back. And the upside being that when you get out into the world, sometimes, mortals have created new spells and stuff like that they can see in action and learn a little bit, but they're always kind of trying to get back to the library. Now, the idea of a bunch of book nerds going on to war may not seem scary, but what is scary is their defining feature of their Change Coven, and that is Screamers. Screamers are these chaotic, flying manta rays of Tzeentch. They're wild, they're violent, they're thrashing, and they're drawn to all kinds of magic. So when the Change Host goes to war, they make this big magical display, bring a whole bunch of Screamers with them, and just drop into the realm. Remember, they want things to be over as quick as possible, and they just dump a bunch of Screamers all over the enemy. All of a sudden, those book nerds are unleashing a flood of screaming, writhing, aggressive, flying monsters on your head, and not to mention, they are themselves incredible, powerful magic wielders, and they're just unleashing lightning and all kinds of hell upon the realms. They use the knowledge they've gained to devastating effect. And I guess I like them the most because I like this knowledge hoarding aspect of them, and the idea of just we need to get this over with, what's the quickest way? just dumping screamers all over them because they're just kind of hovering around us as we study magic anyway. We'll just use them. I like that idea. It's very practical, and the fact that they seem annoyed by going to war, which is literally the only part of the lore that we get to interact with as players, I thought was really funny. Now we're going to start moving into the more mortal focused of the Change Covens here. We're going to start by talking about the cult of the Transient form. This cult is all about change. Of course, it's Tzeentch. Of course, they're all kind of about change, but in particular, it's all about personal physical mutation is viewed as a pathway to the divine. Of particular note, the average cultist here really wants to be a Zangor. One of those Tzeentchian beastmen, bulked up with superhuman strengths, and their minds evolve to the next level, at least how they perceive it. And so this is represented in the rules that when an acolyte goes down, there's a chance they'll warp and twist into a Zangor. Really thematic. It's very cool. And it's an interesting play on this idea of the path to glory. I talked about that quite a bit last time I did a bunch of videos where I was talking about the Slaves to Darkness path to glory, where, you know, all mutations can be seen as blessings from the god, but this is specifically recognizable physical mutations, right? Favor is marked by how much you can change and warp on a personal level. And it has to be in a way that displays to other people. It's not just like Korgus Cole lives a long time, he has a long lifespan. No, it's got to be a very outward demonstration of warping. And while the leaders here are happy to bestow mutation onto their followers, they themselves want nothing less than demonhood. The difference is between them and somebody on a typical path to glory is that many of those who finally achieve it, they're still not happy. They reach the thing that all the chaos heroes are fighting for, but the problem is that they've become so obsessed with physical change, right? Change became the goal at some point, not just ascension. So many are not happy with the idea of having a final form. Now next up is the Pyroflame Cult. This one stands out, frankly, because of how little information there actually is. It's kind of the mortal mirror of the Eternal Conflagration, right? It's all about destruction, straightforwardness with fire, right? The distinction, though, is made within their entry that where the Eternal Conflagration focuses on that destruction through change and warping fire, the Pyroflame Cult is straight up destruction. This fire is not trying to warp things or change the realms, it just wants to destroy. No subtlety, mutations, it's straight pyromancy using waves of Carrick acolytes to burn and destroy. And their specialty is conjuring this like living flame. It can hop from target to target, spread and multiply itself, almost like the fire that they're throwing has some kind of low intelligence of its own. And the members of this Change Coven are there to facilitate and spread this fire. But like I said, there's actually not a lot of information, actual information about them. And the last of the Change Covens is the Guild of Summoners. Now, I'm going to shock you here, viewers. The Guild of Summoners is about summoning demons. But this isn't the most boring and self-descriptive title there is. There's actually a really cool story here that I think shows off Tzeentch in a very unique way. In possibly the most Tzeentchy theme there is, we have two perspectives when it comes to this Change Coven. There's the Summoners and the Lords of Change. The Summoners are just about everyone that you could actually play in the army, right? They dedicated their lives to the study and discipline and the art of pulling demons into the mortal realms. Totally makes sense, right? They start by summoning horrors and little things like that, but their ultimate goal is to summon 9 very specific Lords of Change to the battlefield, because they believe that doing so will complete a powerful ritual, and that once all 9 are summoned at once on one battlefield, they'll be able to bind all 9 of them to their will, ensuring that this Change Coven has the power and the prestige to be the greatest. Okay, so that's what all the mortals think is happening. The other perspective of this is that of those specific 9 Lords of Change. We learn as readers that they have all disappointed Tzeentch in some way, and so in his kind of cleverness and guile, Tzeentch made a decree that those 9 Lords of Change can only regain his favor if they can manipulate summoners into bringing all 9 of them onto the battlefield at once. And so here's the perfect example of plots within plots and schemes within schemes. The Lords of Change are in the doghouse, and so they lie to an entire Change Coven, making up this promise of power. leading the followers to think the Lords of Change will be bound to them. But in actuality, it's a plan for the Lords of Change to get out of the doghouse. I really like that idea, right? Because it highlights one of the cooler parts of mortals working with demons that we don't really see in the stories, and certainly not as much in the other chaos, the chaos god specific books, is we forget that the demons that they interact with, they have their own agenda, right? You think you're using them, but they are always using you. And I wish we saw more of that in other books. I think it would be an incredible touch. Now that is it for all the Change COvens. That's really honestly all that was added from the first edition book to the second. A lot of it's just cleaning up the rules and little minor changes here and there. But I want to talk about why I think the Change COvens are really cool. And the biggest one, and it's really obvious, is that they hit several different notes for what makes Tzeentch an interesting character in the mortal realms, as well as 40k. I mean, these things can, the same basic ideas apply to Tzeentch and 40k as well, with the minor exception of the Pyroflame Cult just kind of having no lore outside of we burn stuff, but we're not like the Eternal Conflagration. At the end of the day, I think that this is what all sub-factions should strive to be. They feel different, right? They feel different narratively. They reveal different, I want to say different sides of the coin when it comes to the kind of army they're representing. Even though Tzeentch is one god, he will fight in very different ways depending on what is appropriate, what is necessary. And I like I said, I think that all battletomes should be as well done as this one. They have reasons to work together, to oppose one another, highlighting different aspects of the army. And so no matter what kind of angle of Tzeentch you have fallen in love with, it can be represented well on a tabletop. And that's why I think it's a slam dunk. I mean, honestly, the lore didn't change very much. I still think that it's a really cool book. It got a great facelift. I don't know why, but the painting section in it really just took me by surprise. Like, this is incredible tutorials. And the Change COvens, I think, just add a lot of dimension to the army that I think just makes it very interesting and engaging when it comes to like creating a story for your army and putting it on the tabletop. So friends, thank you so much for watching. Tell me down in the comments below what your favorite Change COven is. As I said before, my favorite was I think it was the Hosts Arcanum. Yep, that's what it is, the ones with the screamers. I just like the idea of it. I think the rules are really cool too. They play to it, I think, exceptionally well. And it's just this idea of bringing book nerd librarians to the battlefield who don't want to be there, even though that's literally the only part of the game that we get to engage with. I think it's very meta and very funny, and I think screamers are just really cool all of a sudden. So tell me what your favorite was down below, and I'd love to read about it. Thank you all so much for watching, and happy wargaming.